You're watching Act TV. I'm Julianna Forlano. This week, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo put an end to a proposed plan to build a controversial pipeline for fracked gas underneath New York City. This is a major win for the climate activists who've been pushing against the planned pipeline, myself included. But I don't want to take that much credit. According to the climate reporter Alexander Kaufman, who joins us now, this is only the start of what they're saying the nation's largest city needs to do to end its reliance on fossil fuels. Alexander Kaufman is a reporter at HuffPost writing about climate change, environmental policy, and the politics of life on a warming planet. Thanks for joining us today, Alexander.
Thanks for having me.
Well, so a little bit of good news makes the Dow chemical, Superfund flooding disaster, it offsets it slightly, not so much for the people who live in that area, but for the people who live here. Can you talk about the fight against the Williams pipeline? It's been a long haul. Talk about the pipeline and why it's been so controversial.
Sure. So this has been a big and very controversial project in New York for a long time. It was a proposal to build a pipeline that would carry fracked gas from the fracking fields of Pennsylvania through New Jersey and under Raritan Bay and the lower New York Bay over to Staten Island, Brooklyn, parts of Queens, and Long Island. And National Grid, the main utility here, said that it was absolutely necessary to meet the demands that they had for new supply. And activists and consultants were saying that doesn't quite ring true. And the concern was obviously that by building infrastructure like this, you are locking the city into using gas for many years to come. You don't spend over $1 billion building something and then shut it down in just a few years. And that is the kind of thing that scientists are saying needs to happen. You're seeing in other cities bans on new gas hookups and mandates that new buildings have electric appliances instead. So this appeared to be an effort to stymie that. And so there had been a long fight for years against this. Last year, the Cuomo administration did deny a permit to build under the water. There was concerns it could lead to water contamination, but they denied it without prejudice, meaning that there was room for them to reapply. They did, and then the decision came down on Friday. And once again, the administration denied it, and this time with prejudice, meaning that they cannot reapply for that same route.
Why do you think that Andrew Cuomo, who has, generally speaking, been a corporatist, is rejecting this effort?
Well, notably, since last year, there was the passage of New York's big clean energy bill that Cuomo is very proud to boast. Put New York in competition with California for its climate ambitions. Now, New York has a very long way to go in terms of meeting the renewable energy goals that were set under that. But in the rejection letter that the Department of Environmental Conservation sent down on this application, they cited that law. So there is quite literally a statute now that the policymakers in the administration said makes it difficult to approve a project like this. Moreover, you saw in the past few months, different alternatives coming up. It was clear that this was not a necessary project, despite the fact that National Grid insisted that it was. And most importantly, probably Andrew Cuomo was under a lot of pressure from activists to stop something like this. There was a really, really aggressive grassroots effort against it. The New York Times even, described it as being Keystone XL like, really likening it to this very fierce pipeline battle that unfolded earlier in the last decade. And so, I think it comes from that pressure. You may also, I hate to psychoanalyze a politician, certainly one as powerful as Governor Cuomo. But it is notable. He's a guy that likes to throw his weight around. He's a guy that doesn't really seem to like to get pushed around. And National Grid did engage in an illegal moratorium on new gas hookups, and
what does that mean?
So they were saying that we will not, if you build a new building, we will not hook up gas, and so people won't have heating, or people won't have the ability to have their stove,
Wow. So he tried
gas
to use
stoves.
the real estate lobby to pressure Cuomo, and
That's right.
Cuomo has been beholden to the real estate lobby. Wow.
That's right. And so they did this last year, and
Okay.
that obviously really angered the administration. Andrew Cuomo went as far as to say he would consider revoking the monopoly license that National Grid had to service New York City, and downstate New York in general, which was
I
a
gotta
very
say,
aggressive
you
move.
dislike Cuomo, and then he does something like this, and then you like him again.
Yeah, I mean, his beliefs are very clear. I mean, he is an avowed austerity favoring Democrat, and someone
But
that
he
is
did
generally
say no
friendly
to
to business
fracking.
interests. But that's true, and he is somebody who can be pressured, I think, and I think there's credit to be given to the very vibrant and similarly aggressive activist class that exists in New York, that really crusaded for these things for a long time. Also, keep in mind, Cuomo stopped fracking after he, faced a significant primary challenge from Zephyr Teachout, who ran on that. And once again, he really finally adopted a strong climate bill after he faced a serious primary challenge from Cynthia Nixon.
This
So,
is great. So when the states
he's
break
someone
up,
that can be pressured.
exactly. This is when the states break up and he becomes the president of the blue northeastern states of the disunited states. We can know that he can be pressured. This is something we've been talking about a lot on the show, about all our elected officials or potentially elected officials. Can they be pressured? Do they, Josh Fox said that when it comes to the environment, it looks like, that he's definitely going to vote obviously for Biden, because Biden is, can be pressured in this area. So that's exciting to know about Governor Cuomo. Didn't the Williams Company build some of this pipeline? Because when I lived in Rockaway, which was talk about disaster capitalism, right? There was Sandy, and then Hurricane Sandy or Superstorm Sandy came, decimated Rockaway. The beach was a wreck. The buildings were a wreck. And while people were still rebuilding and digging out from that, Williams dropped a pipeline into the beach like a few years after that. And I know that because I watched them do it from my window. They also dug up Flatbush Avenue, which is one of the main busiest streets in the United States, and dropped a pipeline under that, but only under the cover of night. They did not do it during the day. They only did that work at night so people wouldn't see it. Sure, so it wouldn't be busy. That's, but I really think it's more about how so people would not see what they were doing. And pipelines tend to explode. Do we have any evidence that that Governor Cuomo was concerned about the actual safety hazards that these pipelines would pose to New Yorkers?
The safety of gas infrastructure generally has been a bigger concern in the Northeast. I think after there was a big explosion at I believe it was a compressor station in Massachusetts, and that really led to a lot of concern over gas infrastructure generally. That really fueled a big fight in Massachusetts over a compressor station that was proposed in the town of Weymouth. And that was meant to help to export natural gas from the Pennsylvania area all the way up to Canada, actually. So there were a lot of folks in New England who were saying, wow, so we bear all this risk, and so that you can make money selling this to people outside this, to Canadians. And so that definitely is an increasing concern. I also think that the message around the climate risk of these things, which is obviously much less acute, but no less severe, is something that really resonates with a lot of New Yorkers. I think that many of us here have very raw memories of Sandy. Many of us are, very concerned when, we live through a winter like we just lived through, and we experience like one or two snow flurries, and that's it. And, we recognize how weird the weather is. And, you remember November when it was hot, and, I remember wearing a t-shirt when I went to work. And
I remember
so,
last week when it was 40, and then again last week when it was 80.
yeah.
Same week. It's insane.
So I think people recognize that something is going on here, and certainly there isn't the same kind of like ingrained, allegiance to fossil fuels in New York, because that just isn't a big employer in New York. Certainly, there are people that work in the finance side of it here, but it's not a blue collar job in the way that it may be in parts of Texas.
Well, we did
And
just
so,
report yesterday. We reported yesterday that the stockholders at JP Morgan have insisted that JP Morgan come up with a way to make money and not profit off of the climate crisis. Did you read about that?
yeah, that's right. So that's been an ongoing campaign for quite some time where, for a long time, climate activists had been targeting fossil fuel companies directly. Since late last year, there's been a very organized push around targeting financiers of fossil fuels. And you're starting to see a backlash to that. Just earlier this week, Axios published an interview with the energy secretary in the Trump administration, and he, compared policies at banks that limit or prohibit funding for oil and gas drilling in the Arctic to racist redlining that kept Black people from owning homes in certain neighborhoods and from owning homes at all.
That's insane.
And I I think that is
Wow.
an extremely tone deaf comment at best, and frankly racist at worst, and probably both. And so that is very concerning. I think it also goes to show you, if that's the best argument that you have against those sorts of things, then you may not be winning the war for hearts and minds. So this is certainly starting to pinch a lot of fossil fuel companies and freak them out a bit. And so I think that's probably a good sign for climate things, although who knows.
Who knows? Andrew Cuomo came off pretty, looking well for his decision about the pipeline, stopping the Williams pipeline. But according to your reporting, this is just the start of meeting the commitments that he's made. Can you talk about his commitments and where we stand there?
New York has a very, very long way to go on renewables. We generate a very small fraction of our electricity from renewables presently. Even here in New York City, an ostensibly liberal bastion, we have a number of peaker plants within the city limits that burn gas, and a significant number of them that actually burn very dirty fuel oil. Many of them centered here in my neighborhood of Astoria. And there are associated particulate matter levels, which is a type of pollution that causes asthma or triggers asthma and causes all other kinds of respiratory problems. They are statistically higher in Western Queens around these plants than they are in other parts of the city, and higher than the overall city average. So this is a problem even in New York City, to say nothing of the vast and politically diverse state that exists elsewhere. And so you're starting to see a lot of movement on these things. Most people are in agreement that if we are going to decarbonize electricity significantly, it's going to require a significant build out of offshore wind. Cuomo and frankly the federal government, including the Trump administration, have been auctioning leases off Long Island, off New Jersey, and elsewhere in New England for offshore wind turbines. And so that's something that you're going to see being built in the years to come. You're also going to see a lot of fights, I think, with people in the Hamptons who don't want to see wind turbines. So that's certainly how it's played out.
It's very windy in the Rockaways. Well, can we just build them on the buildings? They're just insanely windy. When I lived out there, it was like, this is ridiculous. We're just letting all this wind go by. Come on, let's capture it.
There was a study about almost a decade ago at one of the national labs that found that throughout the United States, the offshore wind capacity that we have, just from the space, the amount of wind that blows, and the amount of ocean space and coastline that belongs to the United States and is in the in its exclusive economic zone that it can build in, is enough to power the entire needs of the country's electricity 4 times over. So there's a lot of potential there, and
yet the government will, they'll say we don't want to plunk something in the middle of the ocean that's going to be an eyesore. Well, but they'll plunk, a oil and gas rig out there that could kill some. You don't hear windmills exploding and killing 15 people in the Gulf and poisoning the entire Gulf of Mexico and getting people out of work who are fishermen, or it's a much safer technology.
And even more importantly, with that comparison, there is that it is a technology where there's a lot of crossover. So as you move away from oil, there's actually a lot of jobs that could be done by workers in that industry now to build and maintain these things. And I think that's an important thing to think about right now, is that, the fight to get off fossil fuels is not a fight to punish or impoverish the workers there. In fact, those workers are the people who many climate people are the most concerned about. There's no real plan for what happens when oil goes bust, as it has, and when that permanently happens, and what you do for the communities that have built their entire livelihoods and prosperity on that industry. And so things like this, industries like this, offer a lot of hope for crossover jobs and jobs that people can transition into. So, there are a lot of positives. There are also concerns about what it will mean for certain fishermen, what it could mean for whale migration long term. And there's a
They'll
lot of
go
work
around. No, I'm just
there's a lot of work that needs to be done around environmentally siting these things and doing them in a responsible way. It has to happen quickly, but it needs to happen responsibly.
Well, whale migration, I love whales, so don't get me wrong. I've been to save the whale since I was 14. But whale migration is changing anyway. So
That's right.
What do you think the impact of just pressuring Cuomo and pressuring our state people could have? Could we, I doubt if we ask Trump to switch from fossil fuels to windmills, he's going to, look kindly on that. What do you think that this revolution could start at the state level?
I think it has to, and it already is. I mean, the most significant movement that we've seen so far on climate policy has been at the state and at the city level. Keep in mind, New York City last year, before the big New York State clean energy bill passed, New York City passed a really energy retrofits bill that mandated that the largest buildings, which are the biggest energy users in the city, retrofit their structures to significantly reduce their emissions, energy, and water use. And so that's a really big deal. And I think even more exciting is things that you are seeing in many cities in California and elsewhere. Even in Boston, the Brookline, which is a suburb of Boston, has they're passing these bans on new gas appliances, and essentially saying that, sorry, everybody's got to transition to electric stoves and appliances like that. And so those things are really going to make a very big difference. And
no, I'm yes, I know.
It matters, and there is actually new research that has come out just this past month that shows that gas stoves lead to ambient air pollution in the home that's really dangerous. So there are a number of benefits, although I realize that not every chef will agree with the superiority of an electric stove, but
I'm fine with it.
Long term, it's necessary. So that's an exciting thing. And so a lot of this movement really can happen and already is happening on the city and the state level.
I didn't plan to ask you about this, but since it's breaking news yesterday and today, I wonder if I could get your comments about it. The dam breaking and flooding of the Dow Chemical plant in Michigan. Could you just give us your thoughts on what we're looking at in terms of environmental catastrophe?
This is obviously a really big concern. We're watching it as it's unfolding with the Dow plant. But I think the real takeaway from this, and to quote Abdul El Sayed, the former progressive candidate for governor in Michigan, he did not win. Gretchen Whitmer did win, but when I spoke to him yesterday about this, he said, "Look, this is catastrophe upon catastrophe. People were already dealing with the pandemic there. Now they're dealing with this flooding, and frankly, this was avoidable. There were concerns about the ability of this dam to withstand significant flooding for a very long time. We've understood for a long time that that region of the country was going to experience a lot of increased flooding. You've already been seeing it happening in the Great Lakes, really significant erosion and water levels rising. And so this was entirely avoidable, and this, I think, really underscores why, this recovery that we are thinking about after COVID needs to be focused on doing clean, climate-friendly infrastructure, because it is just a disaster waiting to happen, and it's a disaster that will not wait for the present disaster to end before it takes place. And that's more than anything, the real takeaway here is that we really need to dramatically overhaul the way that we are preparing for what is already happening, and that if we don't, we may find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic we didn't expect, cleaning up a mess and trying to resettle people, 10,000 people who've been displaced from their homes in the middle of a time where they should be sheltering.
I doubt Trump will do anything to help. He doesn't like Michigan. He's already trying to, we reported earlier, trying to cut funds to the state because the state decided to mail 7.7 million people, every resident in the state, a vote by mail ballot. So, I mean, I just looking at what's happening, what we're seeing is water going into ponds that have toxic chemicals in them, and then that water going into your house or leaching into the drinking water. Are cleanup efforts even a possibility when something like this happens?
I would think so. I don't have the expertise to answer that in a way that I think will provide a clear and nuanced answer. But this isn't the first time you've seen things happen like this, and certainly this was a big concern during the Hurricane Harvey in Texas, where that flooding. I mean, Houston is a massive, massive site of the chemical industry, and you saw a lot of sites there being flooded and being put into danger. So there are ways to address this. Will it be done equitably? Will it be done in such a way that certainly salvages all of the environmental safety that existed beforehand for people? It's unclear. It's also unclear how much pollution already existed that maybe wasn't flowing into people's basements in the way that it will be now, but that was already being emitted, or it was creating contamination in that area just from the presence of those things. So it's hard to say.
Sure,
But
Dow is thrilled. Now they don't have to get rid of those pools that they've been wondering what to do with all of this time, and not having anything to do with. This is a win, sort of, for them. Can they be held responsible for any kind of malfeasance? It might be too early to tell, but
I think it's too early to tell. Liability law when it comes to these things is very complex, but it is notable that, at this time, the Trump administration, and specifically, the Labor Department, but elsewhere in the administration, has been working hard to find ways to shield companies from liability for putting their workers in danger during the pandemic. So, if they do face, potential liability, they also have, some generally quite friendly regulators at the top levels of government who may be able to come to their defense. So that is, it's too early to tell, but it's not the best environment for holding a company like that accountable.
so back here on the home front with Cuomo, what's the next big fight we're looking at? What should we be paying attention to and getting involved with?
Well, there are still plans to build another smaller gas pipeline in Brooklyn. This is
What?
something that
Oh.
that people have been very angry about in Bushwick specifically. State Senator Julia Salazar has been very out front in opposing this, and there are still plans to move forward with that. So there's a fight still to be waged on that front.
And Bushwick is a historically African American, lower income community that has been quickly gentrifying because it's next to Williamsburg. So you've got a disenfranchised population as well, meets moneyed but also uh, hipster population. Are hipsters very politically active when it comes to the environment, or do they just say they're politically active when it comes to the environment, and then they go to the bar for craft beers?
With all due respect to the neighbor Bushwick, where I've had some good times before, but try not to hang out there. I'm not the
I never go there.
the kids that move here from the suburbs of Ohio and then decide that they're the next great artist and like the coolest person in the world, and it's not really my scene. So but that said, I think anybody everybody has to live in the environment, and I think this will be the animating political issue of the century, and so I would expect that at some point it will be cool to care about those things, hopefully in a more substantive and active way than, I don't know, only drinking paper straws.
Alexander Kaufman from HuffPost, thanks for joining us. It's always a pleasure. You can follow Alexander's work at Alex C. Kaufman, Kaufman, on Twitter, or just go to HuffPost and you'll see his columns there. The latest column is Andrew Cuomo rejects controversial gas pipeline, handing climate activists a victory. If you're watching, this is Act TV. I'm Julianna Forlano. If you're watching on YouTube, definitely subscribe and share this video. Thanks for watching.